Hey y'all. Well, we're fixing to get into wiring up the switch and the primary side of the power transformer. And like I showed you in the last video, I want to connect the fused side of the power connector to the outboard terminal of the switch. So we're going to make up a little wire that looks kind of like this. That's going to go between this top terminal and then the outboard terminal of the switch. So on this outer leg, we're going to bend this over. We don't want a lot sticking through. We just want just a little bit of the wire sticking through that terminal. And it's going to sit kind of like that. It's kind of hard to see because that wire is black. But given this is the hot, that's the color coding in the US, is that the hot lead is black. And so when I get this soldered in, it'll be easier to then zoom in and show you what this looks like after it's in place. Soldered in place wire looks like. And hold that while it cools off so that the joint doesn't crystallize. There we go. And we'll get in here and get the other end through the hole in the switch. And sometimes if you bend it a little past, like the hole where the hole is going to go in, and then bring it back and kind of hook it in like that, and then it'll sit there. Let me see if I think you can see it now. It's going from here down around into this outboard terminal on the switch. So let's solder this little guy in place. And there we go. We got plenty of gap here between this ground and this power lead. Now, like I said, if this was straight out like it was originally, it would be getting in the way of this wire and the switch. So this terminal got bent down 90 degrees when we made up our chassis ground there. So now we want to have these twisted as we bring these over. And we want to connect. Going to get those twisted up. And we want to connect the black one here and then the white one up here. And we may want to just go like that much of a twist. That's probably fine. And connect them just like that. So let's go ahead and trim off. Let's connect this black one first. I'm going to cut off, leave just a little bit of extra. Okay, so now we want to connect this up right there in the center. Like that. So we want to twist these up pretty tight. And bend it over like that. put it through the switch, the hole of the switch, and then get a little screwdriver or something and bend it back over on itself like that. And then solder that guy in place. There we go. And then we're going to pull this white one up. And solder it to that lug right there. So, again, trim that off with just a little extra. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and heat this up, because one of the things I've learned is the insulation is going to melt back a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and tin that up a little bit. Bend this over. Hook it on that terminal. And solder that one in place. And there we go. There's our primary wiring. Again, the hot lead comes around this wire to the outboard terminal on the switch. The center goes over to the black on the primary. This white is the other primary, comes back to the neutral. And then it's got a fuse holder right here that's part of the inlet socket. And then it just snaps in there. And we have our fuse. So like I said, we're not going to be using these two wires. And so what I want to do is leave these long enough where I can tuck them kind of behind that switch where they'll stay in place. So we're going to cut these off about right there. And then we're going to get our little heat shrink tubing kit. Because these are fairly high voltage, I want to make sure that they're well insulated and we don't end up with a problem with these things arcing to the chassis. Even though the wire's not. And then while it's still warm, I kind of smash it like that. And then we'll trim that off. And then put another one on this lead. And then finally, I want to have these ends bent over inside some shrink tubing. Be a little bigger piece. Like that. And put that over the whole thing. And shrink this down. Just like that. And then tuck these underneath there like that, so they're out of the way. So all we have left coming out are these are the 250 volt, and these are our 6.3 volts. Now I want to test the LED brightness. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little off and stagger these and put a piece of heat shrink tubing over them. And that way I can hook the 6.3 up to the board and power it up and experiment with the resistor value on the LED and get one that I like the brightness of. So, and that way these wires are, since it's 250 volts, they're like shrunk out of the way and they're not going to be a danger to anybody. And we're just going to hook up the 6.3 AC right there. We're going to hook these two up to there, and then play with this. Let me just go ahead and hook them up this way, and then play with this LED and this resistor value until we get one the right brightness. So I think I'm going to do that off camera and come back and then tell you the value of this, and we'll start building this little LED tower to install it. And then basically then we just got to bolt this board in and hook up the 250 volt and the 6.3 volt, and we'll have the power supply finished. So let me go do that, and we'll be back in a few. Okay, so I hooked this up, just pulling these wires out like this, and powered it up, and this LED lit up, and I just had the resistor kind of sitting in here while I tried different ones, and a 47K looks good. It's a little bright looking at it from straight on like this, but when I'm looking at the side of it, it's not real bright, and that's what I'm going to be seeing. So I think that's a good compromise. So we are ready to untack these two wires, and as you can see, I just barely kind of soldered them in. I didn't get crazy soldering them because I knew this was just temporary. So like that, still, as you can see, still the hole's still there, so that'll be super easy to deal with. And all I need to do now is put this 47K resistor in place. Obviously, this can be any kind of resistor. I think this is a carbon film resistor, which I usually use metal film, but for this purpose, all it's doing is feeding this LED. Not an issue. That, and then get our snippers in. Snip. Snip. Now, see, this is one thing you got to be careful of. See right here, we got a little piece of solder was jumping across the traces. And that's the last thing you want to do, is look over the board real closely and make sure that you don't have any solder bridging between traces, because that is not good to have that happening. Like this little blob right there, but it's sitting on top of the trace. It's not hurting anything. And no bridge traces. And we'll look on this side too. Don't see anything. So like I said, we have our LED now is sitting up on these little stands. I'm going to separate these wires a little bit. Because what we want to happen, if it does like push in, that it would spread these wires apart, not push these leads together and short them out. Okay, so I think we're ready now to bolt this board into the chassis. So, and then as we feed it in, we're going to get that LED to go through that hole, and then hold the board, flip it over, and start some Allen bolts. There's that one. There's that hole there lining up. We're trying to. And this is why we didn't tighten up the standoffs on the underside, is we need there to be a little bit of flexibility up here on the top so that we can wiggle these around and get the holes to line up. And then we'll tighten everything up. So there we go. And our LEDs coming right up through the top. And we use the actual board circuit to connect the LED to. So it'll come on when once we have the heater voltage, that light will come on. So that lets us know that we have heater voltage on the tubes. So if at some point there is a problem where a tube isn't lighting up, we know that it's not the power supply that's causing the problem. So we're going to tighten these on the top first. And it is going to mush. You'll see it mush the paint out from underneath the screw a little bit. It's been drying for about 48 hours. So the paint should be about as dry as it's going to get. So now we want to tighten up the bolts on the bottom of these standoffs. That. Again, I know this is kind of hard to see being inside the chassis like this, but I'm doing my best to keep what I'm doing in camera view. Like that. Okay, so we have the 250 volt leads that are going to come up here. And so we want to make sure these are twisted pretty tight. And then they're going to connect right there, like that. So we want to trim these off. Like that. And then the same with these. These are going to be twisted up. I mean, I guess if you really wanted to be fancy, you could have these come in from the bottom side, but it would probably be a little trickier to get the board installed in the chassis, and I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for the amount of effort that that's going to create. So we're going to solder the wires in from the top. Just like that. And then let me get these wires stripped and we'll come back and I'll show you soldering them. Okay, I almost forgot another little thing we need to install. And I figured this out after I put my other one together, that it had a really loud pop noise when you would turn it on and off through the amplifier. And so I'll link the capacitor that I'm installing in the chat. But this little capacitor needs to go across the switch. And so you want to bend the leads up like this so it can go in across the switch. And I went ahead and tinned these leads up just a little bit. And we're going to hold this up like this and solder it to those two terminals. Let me get the tip clean. Get some fresh solder on the terminal, on the end of the tip. And then I'm going to try to do this without melting that wire right there. There's that side. Bend that over a little bit. So it's touching that. And solder this side. There we go. And I'm going to make sure we don't have, we keep our gap between those two terminals. Yep. And now that little capacitor is in there across the switch. And that way when you turn the phono stage off, if it's plugged into a powered up amplifier, it won't give you that loud pop like you would get. So we're going to put the board back in and then get back to soldering up the power wires to it. And we got the board back in, and this looks like a good spot to jump to the next video. Hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, please subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you soon for some more preamplifier fun. Have a great day.